Welcome back to Best Asian Horror Movies. I'm your host Blinky, and today we're going to be exploring Hong Kong horror classic Dumplings. We're also going to be comparing it to body horror masterpiece The Substance and discussing the societal critiques of both films. At the end of the video, we're going to give the movie our own rating based on story, atmosphere, and flesh-ripping terror. Before we begin, please like and subscribe.
Thank you.
Dumplings is a 2004 Hong Kong horror film directed by Fruit Chan. Originally part of an anthology entitled Three Extremes, the segment was eventually expanded into a feature film, which has won numerous awards over the years. Our story follows Mrs. Lee, a former actress who finds her beauty fading away and suspects her husband of having an affair with a younger woman. Desperate to reverse the aging process and restore her youthful allure, she turns to Aunt May, a local chef whose dumplings are rumored to have rejuvenating properties. Unbeknownst to Mrs. Lee, Aunt May's recipe holds a dark and sinister secret. Her dumplings are made from the meat of unborn fetuses from a clinic where she once worked. Frustrated by the lack of immediate results, Mrs. Lee returns to May's home, pressing her for more potent solutions. Shortly after, Aunt May is approached by a young girl named Kate and her mother, who beg her to perform an abortion on the girl's child. The mother reveals that it was the girl's father who had impregnated her, and that the family couldn't afford to have the procedure done in a hospital. Refusing at first, May eventually agrees, determining she can charge Mrs. Lee a premium price for her next batch of dumplings. Days after the abortion, Kate and her mother are riding a bus home when passengers discover a pool of blood in Kate's seat. As they disembark, Kate collapses on the ground and dies in her mother's arms. As Mrs. Lee hosts a dinner party to flaunt her newfound appearance, her friends can't shake the horrific fishy odor emanating from her, an unsettling hint of the horrors she's consumed. In a state of despair and rage, she calls Aunt May, demanding answers about what she's ingested. As May reveals the truth to a hysterical Mrs. Lee, her husband listens in from the other line and departs to track down the sinister chef. Welcoming Mr. Lee inside, Aunt May quickly seduces him. In the middle of their violent, passionate lovemaking, Mr. Lee makes yet another horrific discovery. Aunt May is 64 years old and had been eating the dumplings for years to maintain her youthful appearance. Far away from the luxurious hotel where the Lees have been staying, we're next taken inside a dilapidated apartment in the outskirts of Hong Kong, where the police are investigating a brutal murder. We soon discover that in a fit of rage, Kate's mother had murdered her husband, exacting revenge on the monster who destroyed her life. In a harrowing finale, Mrs. Lee tracks down the young masseuse her husband had been having an affair with, who reveals that she'd become pregnant by the wealthy tycoon and is planning on having the baby to get a share of Mr. Lee's fortune. Mrs. Lee offers to double the payment, on the condition that she abort the child immediately. After the procedure concludes, Mrs. Lee is next seen in her kitchen, removing the unborn child from her freezer and unsheathing a massive cleaver, determined to recreate Aunt May's culinary abomination. China's one-child policy, implemented in 1979, was a government initiative aimed at controlling population growth to foster economic development. The policy limited most urban families to one child, with exceptions for rural families and certain ethnic minorities. Although the policy was effective in curbing population growth, it led to significant social consequences, including an aging population, a gender imbalance due to preference for sons, and widespread human rights violations, such as forced abortions and sterilizations. Abortion in China was legal and became a tool of population control under the policy. The government promoted abortion and sterilization to ensure compliance, and many women were pressured or coerced into undergoing these procedures. This state-sanctioned practice sparked both domestic and international outrage, as many felt it violated women's rights and personal freedoms. It wouldn't be until 2016 when the policy was officially lifted. Dumplings serves as a chilling critique of the policy, particularly of the forced illegal abortions that became all too prevalent, reflecting the deep emotional and psychological scars left by the state's control over reproduction. There are many parallels that can be drawn between Dumplings and The Substance. Both films explore themes of ageism, misogyny, and societal expectations through the eyes of aging actresses who take desperate measures to restore their youth. In both cases, their obsession with recapturing their former glory leads them to experiment with mysterious elixirs, which they do not fully comprehend. While Dumplings critiques China's one-child policy and the societal obsession with youth, The Substance focuses more on the dark side of Hollywood and the consequences of body manipulation. While Dumplings is firmly grounded in realism, The Substance critiques the cultural obsession with beauty through a more absurdist and sci-fi-inspired story, offering a scathing disparagement of misogyny in Hollywood. The Substance proudly paid homage to numerous Hollywood classics, including The Fly, The Shining, and Requiem for a Dream. I was, however, unable to find any evidence of Substance director Coraline Farge mentioning Dumplings as an inspiration for the film. It is possible that she'd never seen it, and that the similarities between the two are just a coincidence. But one scene that stood out to me when watching Dumplings was when Mrs. Lee puts on a thick coat, sunglasses, and a babushka before venturing outside as she hopes to hide her deformities, almost exactly as it was executed in The Substance. Ultimately, we have two excellent films tackling similar themes, made nearly 2 decades apart on opposite sides of the planet. If they ever do a remake of Dumplings, I would love to see them incorporate more body horror like what we were able to enjoy in The Substance. Here at Best Asian Horror Movies, we're going to be rating our films based on 3 criteria: story, atmosphere, and terror, with each category eligible for a maximum of 6 bloody skulls. Very unique story here. I'm glad I finally got around to watching this one. I've seen a lot of films recently with ambiguous, open-ended finales that require a lot of introspection and extracurricular research to figure out what happened, so it was refreshing to watch something with a straightforward plot. Secret ingredients aside, the B-plot of Kate's pregnancy and abortion was what really left the biggest impression on me. I'm gonna go with 5 bloody skulls here. In addition to critiquing the one-child policy and the societal pressure on women to maintain their beauty, I think director Fruit Chen also wanted to expose the dark realities of the wealth gap in Hong Kong and highlight that beneath these towering cyberpunk skyscrapers there are also still a lot of poor people who are struggling to make ends meet. I think this was done really well in the contrast between the luxury hotels that the Lees were staying in and the dilapidated rundown apartments where Aunt May and Kate's families were staying. Aunt May's house was so creepy and unnerving, but to be fair, I burst out laughing when I saw the porcelain figures of Jesus and Mary next to Mao Zedong. The interior of her home was definitely befitting of a 64-year-old Chinese auntie. Also, hats off to the Foley artist here. The excessively loud squishing sounds whenever someone was eating or banging just added so much impact and made everything feel so much more gross and uncomfortable. I'm gonna go with 5 bloody skulls here. There are no zombies, ghosts, or jump scares here. It's not scary by the standards of a typical horror movie. It is, however, disgusting and depressing. And I mean that as a compliment. The scene where Kate is having her back alley abortion made me ruminate on all the poor women who have had to do something similar and in many cases will face this issue in their lifetimes at some point, depending on where they live and what the laws regarding abortion are at the time. It's quite a depressing movie. It's really, really sad. 4 bloody skulls. Alright, that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you'd like me to review next, and I'll catch y'all next time.